Welcome back to Arcane Adventures Recapped. Today we will be discussing the events of Lorem Ipsum, our new campaign, and Chapter 3, Take Flight. Let's dive into this recap. Rancor and Evidin investigate a lead that Rancor has acquired from Tony, the rather auspicious individual who lives here in Provenere. This tip, of course, relates to Moonlit Drop, and specifically the Bright Shadow. They visit In Trouble and meet drow bartender Lydia Berdier, who has some secrets of her own but is willing to divulge information regarding the quote-unquote Lady of Light, and her connection to the criminal syndicate of Provenere. Paloma spends this time training with Harris and Master Stormpaw, while Sizik gets arrested and is prepared to be executed. Paloma and Ultrix wait for a dreaded moment, while Owenel works at Steel and Thundelver, and Pura takes a much-needed day-long rest. Rancor and Evidin then turn to glean knowledge about gelatinous cubes, seeking to maybe complete a quest or two for a job. The entire group then has to witness Sizik be decapitated in public, in the Hex, which they later learn was actually a simulacrum of Sizik created by Madame Janorum. Afterwards, actual, real, living Sizik returns to the group's care, and Madame Janorum and Officer Mox accompany the group to their apartment to pay them for their services. When asked for a name to collectively refer to them as, our party suggests the name Lorem Ipsum, of which Madame Janorum smiles and notes that, in Elvish, it means whatever you want it to be. She then prompts the group with an opportunity to be hired again should the council, or perhaps this faction of the council, require their services again as necessary. And the party heads to bed that evening, and we find a good rest. Except for Owenel, who has a terrifying and familiar nightmare, and is abruptly awoken in the middle of the night. Awakening from a dream the following morning, however, Pura then commissions Ultrix to construct a device that can harness his hemocraft abilities into a more portable-sized weapon. At dawn, Paloma finds Sizik in an ethereal-like state before he returns to normalcy, and awakes to accompany Paloma to her morning class at the Storm Dojo, where she spars a bit with Master Stormpaw in excellent display of skill, while Evidin and Rancor decide to do a bit more investigating on the Bright Shadow, which they learned about the day before, and the rest of the group heads to the Hex to partake in the inaugural ceremony of 5 new council members, those taking the place on the city's ruling body in the shadow of the tragic deaths of the council members in the days prior. In the afternoon, Crater reveals that he is disappointed that he missed their showtime, and would likely lose their opportunity to perform as a whole. Sizik, however, is determined to see this opportunity through and resolves to ensure that they had to at least put their show on one time. With careful permission and a little bit of persuasion, they secure a slot in the evening's schedule to perform at Tequila Mockingbird. They spend a great part of the afternoon preparing for the show, deciding to star Sizik in a new show titled The Magical Tales from Across Alethea, The Adventures of Harryson Fjord, where Sizik would play an adventurer seeking out a magical carrot and would face off against Carrot Couture, an evil wizard played by Pura. With accompaniment from Crater and Yazira, they rehearse for the show the entire afternoon, and when showtime arrives, with surprising display of action, drama, and story, they impressed and wowed the audience with a captivating tale of the young rabbit. Mock was also impressed and offered them a regular gig, which includes regular payment. But meanwhile, across the city, Paloma accompanies Ultrix to the home of Officer Mox Flynn, where Ultrix and Mox have a semi-private conversation about Ultrix's historical family and how Mox knows of his mother, as they were research co-workers. However, when Mox produces a portrait from the past, Ultrix recognizes something, or perhaps someone, and that prompts him to make a hasted exit. Paloma, no doubt eavesdropping on this entire conversation for the most part, quickly leaves the premise with Ultrix, and, while some of our protagonists have found great success this night, others are left with far more questions than answers. But earlier that day, back to Rancor and Evidin, who had ventured out to the west outskirts of Provenere to investigate the Moonlit Drop, where the man-made river that runs and cuts through the Great Divide, the park that divides the two nations of Provenere, cascades a decent drop into a pool at the base of a cliff. It is here that Rancor and Evedin investigate and find a secret passage concealed by an illusion behind this waterfall. They send Crow, the raven familiar of Evedin, to investigate invisibly and follow a rather long, carved tunnel leading beneath Provenary proper. This shocking reveal of a large underground cavern filled with various pipes, networks of fluid moving through vats and piping as well, and the workers toiling away at creating colored concoctions. But more alarming still is a woman who stands here amidst the hustle and bustle. She is dressed in a white dress, and she shouts orders at the nearby laborers, and a supervisor of sorts notices the bird overhead, even though it is invisible, and fires a blast of pink energy that destroys Evedin's familiar immediately, awakening Evedin back to her consciousness proper in her own body. She then relays this information to Rancor, and a grave implication befalls Rancor's mind, and he storms off in agitation back to the apartment flat. Later that evening, as all of Lorem Ipsum return home, they find a strong tension amidst them necessitates a more serious conversation to be had. Owen'll cast Zone of Truth, and the group grills and targets Pura, asking him a slew of questions regarding his connection to Miss Tylexia. And after a conversation of Rancor attempting to explain that, at this time he wishes to find the group hiding beneath the city and bring them to justice, and the party urging him to sleep over this decision, and then decide the following morning. But they, for now at least, they prepare for the evening to retire. Owen'll responds to a sudden knock at the door, where he meets Cyriel, an old classmate of his that has a letter for Owen'll from his father, which leads to him reading it aloud to the group, and proceeds to take several moments to realize a situation that he finds himself in, that being disobedient of the order and a promise that he gave to his parents to bring Evedin home once he found her. But a bit later, as we begin to turn in for the night, Rancor slips out of the apartment as a rainstorm befalls the city. Rancor visits Officer Mox in the midst of the night, and presents him with a request to speak with Miss Tylexia directly, asking her if she has any connection to the group below the city, or at least perhaps some insight. But the conversation with Mox, however, does not go as hoped, as the Red Shielder commander is unwilling to pursue this information further, at least until Rancor can offer some kind of proof, at which, this time, he has none. In a bit of frustration, Rancor argues with Mox, accusing him and the council of being useless, and then leaves. Back home, Evedin finds herself in her own nightmarish dreamscape, a labyrinth where she continually comes face to face with a mysterious raven that beckons her into a graveyard, where Evedin finds herself ultimately, in reality, standing over a stone crypt, and eventually finds her place inside of such, grappled by an animated skeleton. It is in this vision, mixed with flashes of reality and consciousness, that Evedin comes directly in contact with the Soul Matron, who issues a dire warning that more may be at play, and that she should be cautious of what dangerous futures may lie ahead. But awakening the next morning, Evedin is once again in her bed, drenched from rainwater, and stifled with questions. She takes Yazira and Paloma with her to investigate the real-life cemetery from her dream, a place within Provenary proper, with an eerily similar crypt and a haunting visage, suggesting this dream may have been more truth than she could have expected. In hopes of being better prepared to investigate the underground cavern, the group then splits up to purchase some items and supplies and make their final preparations, hoping to find Rancor soon, and hoping he did not charge recklessly without them ahead. But whatever comes next, it brings its own dangers, and whatever is at play may be bigger than they have realized. Rancor returns home to find the party discussing the events from earlier that morning. It's about midday now. After a bit of convincing, he is able to persuade Lorem Ipsum to accompany him to the depths below the city, with hopes to face off against the Bright Shadow and her criminal syndicate. And for Rancor, slaying her would be the ultimate conclusion of this. But first, we head to Madame Lepori's shop, Hexes and Scrolls, to do a bit of magic item window shopping and rummage through her bargain bin clearance items. After this, we return back to the apartment and decide to wait until nightfall before infiltrating the dungeon below the city. We'll make a plan during that time and get a mid-afternoon nap in our waiting. And as daylight gives way to dusk and twilight, our group makes way for the west side of the city, arriving at the top of the Great Divide, where the cascading waterfall secretly hides the entrance to a cavern that leads beneath Provenere. But while rappelling to this secret entrance, some of our party members have an unfortunate incident that causes them to fall to the base of the waterfall. Unfortunately, Pura, amongst this group, who was concentrating on a spell that was helping them with stealth, loses concentration on said spell. But no matter, they made do, and eventually each of us were staring at the mouth of a long, carved tunnel into the rocky ground. Our adventurers take caution as they explore this dark tunnel, searching for traps and on high alert for anyone that might now be aware of their presence. As they successfully evade both traps that are set in this tunnel, before they make their way towards the opening at the end of this corridor, an even larger cavern, home of an alchemical dungeon run by the Bright Shadow herself. At first, Rancor, Pura, Paloma, and Sizik sneakily enter onto a platform, quickly taking out 2 supervising guards. But unfortunately, wearing armor that makes it quite difficult for them to remain quiet, Owenel and Altrix enter the chamber with armor-clad clink-clanks, alerting the other guards to the party's presence. And the dungeon, which was a working space, rapidly becomes a full combat scene. Spells flying across the room and swords clattering with each other, the party must push past an acid vat workstation, bypass mechanicals that are way too reminding of the incident with the fake Esquire Roran, fight elite lieutenants, and then ultimately draw nearer to the Bright Shadow herself, all while dodging explosions of flammable acid and the fleeing panicked workers caught in the crossfire. Unexpected by the Bright Shadow, however, is the success of the party in slaying her 3 best fighters and making it further into the factory than she previously thought. When she realized how serious of an intrusion this really was, and despite a vengeful plea from Rancor, she did not hesitate to retreat towards the central platform and quickly escape with what guard she could via a teleportation circle inscribed on the ground and a spherical device that she smashed on it. But, to the dismay of our group, now that she has escaped, no doubt that we will see her again in the future. But not all is bad, as a few survivors, workers, still remain in the remnants of the dungeon, and are now ripe for interrogation and questioning. In addition, the dungeon itself is left behind with its loot and treasure now to be taken and rummaged through by the party. And as the sounds of combat fade, Altrix receives a sending directly from Relzar Kinber, promptly informing him, and to relay to the rest of the group, that yet another murder has been committed, and the Council of Provenere, specifically once again Madame Janorum and Officer Mox Flynn, is in need of their assistance. And with that, with a dungeon to loot, people to interrogate, and another murder investigation at hand, our party finds themselves with quite a few things to focus on next. Our party rummages through the remains of the dungeon left behind by the Bright Shadow, or as we learn from one of her workers, the true name of the Bright Shadow, Karamira. We also question some of the other workers who are employed by her and give us a little bit more of an insight on what she was working on here. And after this, Lorem Ipsum answers the summons to Consalis Hill and meets with Madame Janorum, Officer Mox Flynn, Vilas, and Relzar Kinber. The 2 groups exchange insightful information, prompting Lorem Ipsum to investigate the murder of Sir Lioces McKinnon, and further interrogate Miss Tylexia to see if she is responsible, while the Red Shielders will investigate both the estate of Miss Tylexia to search for additional clues surrounding her involvement, and search through the underground cavern that houses the alchemical dungeon, and drug production operation left by Chiramira. As we return home for a night's rest, however, our day begins early as we set out to divide and conquer the task ahead of us. Paloma, Sizik, Aldrich, and Evedin visit the McKinnon family home to look over the crime scene and ask questions to Wesley and Evelyn McKinnon, the two orphaned children now left behind in the wake of the murders of both of their parents. They find the crime scene looks oddly familiar to the previous murders, but the interrogation that Rancor and Pura have with Miss Alexia suggests that she is likely not as responsible for this, which further complicates a question of her true guilt or even innocence in this grand murder case. Miss Alexia also reveals that she did know a bit about Chiramira and had some business deals with her in the past, but she also reveals an even larger plot currently at hand that she and Esquire Luso, prior to his death, had uncovered to overthrow the entire city council in a coup, noting that she was hesitant to inform anyone else of this because it got Luso killed, and she suspected that she would be safer while in prison under the supervision of the Red Shielders. But she offered information important to both Rancor and Pura in exchange for dealing with the Bright Shadow on her behalf, and thus preserving her business endeavors. When revealed this to Madame Janorum about such plot, she expressed concern about the upcoming Take Flight Festival, just a few days away, and notes that if there was ever a time for a coup, it would be now, when the entire council is present for such festivities. And she requests that Lorem Ipsum operate as a private, secondary security. But back at the McKinnon estate, things don't go nearly as productive. The investigation proves inconclusive to lead or any other information suggesting who could have truly killed Sir Lyases. Some of us are caught in a wrong place, wrong time moment, as two arcane-powered detonating devices fly into the upper story of the house, caught off guard, and at the center of the blast, that was probably meant to target the McKinnon heirs, or something else within the house, we are horribly reminded that whoever is behind this all will stop at no lengths to cover their tracks and get what they want. As the smoke clears, Aldrich rushes into the woods to find the assailant, while Paloma and Evedin tend to Sizik, whose left leg has been completely obliterated in the blast. And Aldrich is unable to locate the attacker, but he does take a tumble and fracture his pelvis. Both he and Sizik are rushed to the Temple District for immediate healing and medical attention by Dr. Zilek Chris, who is the medical oversight coordinator and counselor on the Council of Provenary. While Sizik will not be able to walk again without a prosthetic, he will not, at least for the foreseeable future, have the same leg that he has lost. With the present threat still looming, everyone looks towards the events of the festival. While we hope it will all be okay, we make preparations for far worse possibilities. After a much-needed 2.5-day break and the appropriate downtime, Lorem Ipsum has decided to take the job to serve as backup security during the Take Flight Festival. The festival celebrates the first airships that came to the city, and allows for people, the citizens, to both reminisce on their history and look forward to the prosperity of Provenere to come. Madame Janorum, taking center stage this evening, delivers a commencement address that will kick off the events of the festival, but she is suddenly interrupted as gas canisters explode throughout the city and the crowd, sending the revelers and crowd and the people of Provenere into chaos, as an attack against the council is thrown fully into motion. A group of assassins cut their way through the panicked people and fire poison-laced arrows at some of the council members before darting into the alleyways and scaling rooftops, quickly pursued by Lorem Ipsum as they too jump into action. Overhead, an airship has been hijacked and has begun bombarding the city below with gas canisters, spells, and cannon fire alike. But, first things first, we pursue the assassins into the alleys and rooftops of the twisted streets of the dense Hex district, making quick work of the many thugs, and even capturing one of the mages working with the assassins. As the conflict on the ground with these attackers wraps up, Pura is shoulder-checked by a passing individual, who drops a note from Miss Alexia, beckoning him to return to her cell, as she fears she has been betrayed. But, our party must first stop this chaos attack. As they set course for the Provonary skyport, to commandeer an airship and fly it up to the hijacked vessel overhead. When they arrive in the maintenance hangar bay, below the public access terminals of the skyport, they find yet another cell of this attack in progress of stealing another airship, along with the corpses of several civilian workers and red shielders on duty here that must have been struck down by these assailants. But these thugs prove no match for us, as we make quick work and take control of the small merchant ship. However, when the final dying thug tosses another vial of fluctuating sensorium drug, the multicolored gas dropped on the city prior to these events, it affects over half our group. Things get a bit delusional. But thankfully, however, the party members that did not suffer the effects of this gas are able to corral the rest of the group and buy them enough time to let the effects wear off, as we, on the airship, fly through the air. And as our smaller merchant airship draws nearer to the larger hijacked vessel, we leap from one deck to another and engage in close combat with our hijackers. Proving to be a quite difficult endeavor, our party is narrowly victorious against their assailants, and they do end the attack, bringing a breath of peace to Provonary once again, as we return to the ground to aid the people in desperate need and further convey the information to Madame Norum, at least once they locate her in the aftermath. And while this attack has ended, information revealed by one of the hostages notes that this attack is merely a distraction for something else at play. That's all for this Arcane Adventures recapped episode, recounting the highlights and moments of Chapter 3 of Lorem Ipsum, Take Flight. We'll see you in our episodes